Support for the series on women in science and tech comes from Genentech, dedicated to breakthrough science and social good that supports local communities. Because making medicine is just one way to make a difference. Genentech, the future of science is here. Online at gene.com/future.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kamla. My guest today is Gini Deshpande. She's the founder and CEO of NuMedii, which is a Silicon Valley startup. Welcome, Gini.
Thank you for having me on the show.
What does NuMedii do?
We are a data-driven drug discovery company. We are focused on leveraging big data and artificial intelligence to fundamentally improve the way in which we discover drugs, with the idea that we want to ensure the drugs coming out of our technology are going to have a higher likelihood that they will actually benefit patients.
Right there are so many questions, big data, artificial intelligence, and how are you different from other companies that are doing drug discovery? So let's just talk about big data.
Absolutely.
When you say big data, what do you mean?
So there's a large amount of data that's now being collected pertaining to patients, to human beings, with the idea that we can try to better understand what's happening in disease conditions. If we look at a disease like cancer, there's a lot of information. There are certain people who may have certain mutations like BRCA1, BRCA2 that increase the likelihood that they will get certain types of cancer, like breast cancer, ovarian cancer. So that's one type of data, looking at your DNA, that can give you some insights into a predisposition to getting a disease, or how a disease might progress. What are the mutations that are causing a disease? The human genome has been sequenced, and so now people are now able to sequence our DNA very rapidly, and so we can collect a lot of information pertaining to that, how a disease might be progressing. People have things that can be measured in the blood. There are things that can be measured in terms of the proteins that might be
So like
present.
a patient's medical notes?
A patient's medical notes is one type of data. So you can start looking at that and saying, how is this patient responding to a drug? What is happening with the way their disease is progressing? Are there other things that this patient is taking that are either benefiting them or causing adverse problems when they're on a certain medication? So there's a lot of data that's being collected. And we've been in a data-driven world, whether we appreciate it or not. There's a lot of information that, for instance, when you're booking a flight, there's lots and lots of information that gets utilized in terms of computing the price of your ticket at that point in time. Similarly, if you use that as an analogy, there's a lot of information that's being collected pertaining to human diseases that we can now start to take advantage of to start to understand what is really happening in this particular disease. And so that's where big data can shed light on what's happening in a disease condition. So historically, if one were to look at diseases, we've had slivers of information. It's like trying to go into a darkened room and you have a flashlight, and you can look at one corner and search one corner at a time and try to sort of put together the map of what the room might look like. Now imagine being able to turn on the light switch and see the whole room in one go.
So it's like switching on a light and seeing the contours of that room.
The entire room in one go, which I think is what data can really enable.
What you're saying is when you switch on that light, when you see the contours of the room, the contents and contours of the room, it's like switching on a light on our body and bodies, network of bodies, and then being able to see what the pattern is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Was this not being done before?
It was being done at a smaller scale because there were tiny bits of information that were being collected. And so, what was state of the art 20 years ago allowed you to look at one pathway, for instance. Now we can scale up and look at thousands of pathways that might be coming into play in a given disease condition. So that's the power of what big data is enabling us to do.
So you're saying technology has enabled that?
Absolutely. We've now got advances in technology that enable us to profile lots of information at one go. So those advances in tools have enabled us to capture more and more data about a given disease.
So when you were explaining about big data and you gave the analogy of flights, booking flights, the two things that popped in my mind was Google Flights and how it's different from other travel search engines.
Absolutely.
So that means you are building a search engine. Or an engine of sorts.
It's an engine of sorts that enables us to really start to better understand what's happening in a given disease of interest. So for instance, the analogy of the flight that I gave you, the flight price, it's almost customized to you at that point in time. What we are doing with our technology is trying to look at, can we better understand what's happening in a given disease at that point in time for a subset of patients. So we try to understand how can we use this information to better understand patients who are similar to each other in the way the disease is going to show up, and therefore will get benefit from a drug that's now specific to their type of disease.
So what is the technology using? Some sort of algorithms and some sort of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. So artificial intelligence, is essentially what it's doing is enabling us to find connections that our human eyes and human brains aren't quite, able to grasp. These are connections that are made at the network level. So looking at multiple points instead of one data point and connecting two data points, we're looking at connecting thousands of data points to each other. So what the technology does, the artificial intelligence technologies that we utilize, the algorithms that we utilize, really help us find patterns in disease conditions, and then patterns of what a drug might be doing, so that when we match them, we have a higher likelihood that the drug is actually going to work, because you're now looking at multiple things that the drug is impacting instead of just one thing.
So there are different kinds of artificial intelligence. There's supervised, unsupervised.
Absolutely.
So what is the kind of artificial intelligence that you're using, and why are you using?
So we use a variety of different artificial intelligence algorithms within our company, primarily because this is a science-driven business, and it depends on the question that you're asking. So depending on the question that you're asking of the data, different algorithms come into play. So we use a plethora of different artificial intelligence approaches that enable us to answer the question. And some of those are also limited by the data types that we may have access to, or availability of data. So it's really a combination of the data and the questions we want to ask of it that determine which methodologies one might utilize.
And data comes in different forms, structured, unstructured.
Absolutely.
So how do you normalize data? When you're normalizing data, from what I understand, you remove the redundancy and you clean out the data.
You have to clean the data, because in this business, there's a lot of, there's this idiom that it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't clean your data at the front end, what comes out at the back end may not have any higher likelihood of working. So when we work with data, we do go through this curation process where someone with expertise will look at this data and help us figure out, what was the context in which this data was collected? What does this mean? So there's some semi-automation and as well as human curation that happens in the process to ensure that we have very, very good quality data. So we go through and we clean it up, we annotate it correctly, we normalize it. Data is collected across different platforms. How do you work with data collected on an Illumina platform versus an Affymetrix platform? They're very different. So we've developed methodologies to actually enable us to normalize this data, and have some proprietary tools to do that. But that is a very important point. You really need to be able to understand how to work with different data types.
So how are you different from traditional drug discovery company?
I think there's two ways in which we're different. At NuMedii, the data sciences actually drives everything we do. I think in traditional pharmaceutical companies, to some extent, data sciences is an add-on. It's sort of like a service provider. In our case, we actually will find connections and patterns within the data that is going to guide what we do in terms of drug discovery. So other companies might have like an antibody platform, for instance. We have a data platform. And that's sort of fundamentally where it's different, because our intent at the end of the day is that we really want to understand what's happening in the disease, fully understand what's happening there, so that when we come up with a drug, where the drug is going to have a higher likelihood that it will actually work. So rather than taking sort of the traditional approach, which is here's a target, now let me go find a drug for it, we're actually looking at taking data and saying which subsets of patients do we have, and therefore can we find a drug against that subset of patients. The other big difference between us and other companies out there is we built this company to be fully integrated. So the data and the technology is sort of a starting point. At the end of the day, we're still developing drugs. So we want to ensure our drugs are going to work. And that process of taking something coming out of technology, a computer, and turning it into an actual drug that a patient might take, it's called translational medicine. And that piece of taking that information and actually turning it into a drug, we've built a cross-functional team that integrates very tightly with our data scientists, so that there's lots of crosstalk happening between those groups, ensuring that what we develop will actually work in patients.
I'm assuming most of the scientists have PhDs and they're postdoc.
Absolutely.
And your data scientists or your computer folks may be dropouts and they may just have an undergrad degree. They may be PhDs, I don't know. How do the two subsets of folks talk to each other? Because PhDs think a little differently.
Yes, that's a great question. And actually, we're very fortunate that everyone on the team at NuMedii actually has a PhD.
Even the IT people?
Absolutely. Everybody, all our computer scientists,
So is that a decision you made that you wanted PhDs on both sides of the equation?
It happened to be, the people we ended up with have that skill set and that training. And, in the case of what you articulated, it's a cultural thing where, data scientists are very focused on looking at data and coming up with information. They come up with answers very rapidly. And the translational aspects of it might be slower in terms of advancing it forward, testing it carefully, evaluating what's happening with the drug. We've been very fortunate. We built this team, deliberately in such a way, was because both these groups actually enjoy learning from each other. Our drug developers actually appreciate what the technologists can do, the data scientists can do, and our data scientists actually are excited to see something that they've worked on actually advance forward with the idea that it'll ultimately get to a patient.
So you're a new kind of a company compared to the big pharma companies. Why do you think you were able to establish your company? What did the Human Genome Project unlock things for you all? Why did you all start?
It's actually an interesting mix of different events that led to the formation of NuMedii. So the group at Stanford that actually developed our core technology had been looking at reclassifying diseases using all this information that we now have.
Why would they want to reclassify diseases?
That was exactly my question. I said, why would a patient care if two diseases are called, as being similar to each other? And that's what led to the genesis of the company, because we said if there are shared molecular networks between two diseases, can we take advantage of that to expedite the development of drugs for the second disease?
I think your husband made a point in one of the talks about something that was taken for depression that actually helped cure small
cell lung cancer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's these connections.
The molecular connection.
It's
what
the
he was
molecular
talking,
connections that you can take advantage of to expedite developing a drug for a condition like small cell lung cancer. So this drug that you just referenced, it's a tricyclic antidepressant. It goes across the blood-brain barrier. It was developed as a CNS drug.
What is CNS?
A central nervous system. It was meant for depression. And so we actually found through the computer that this would actually have applicability for small cell lung cancer.
So technology helped you discover
The technology helped you discover it. This is not something that we would have found. This is not something, if you look at the information, would be obvious to a scientist that this connection exists.
So you actually saw technology do something that you think otherwise humans may not have caught on to it.
Absolutely. And the point here isn't that this is going to replace humans.
You still need human curation.
You absolutely need humans at the front end and humans at the back end of the process. Where we use the technologies to augment what these really bright scientists can do, the data scientists at the front end and then the drug developers at the back end. It's really augmenting their work and helping see information at a scale and find connections at a scale that are not feasible by the human eye or the human brain.
So you were working at Affymetrix when this whole thing was happening at your husband's lab, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why did you jump and become an entrepreneur? What propelled you? Because it's not an easy path.
It isn't an easy path. It's one that, I was actually consulting for a couple of early stage companies after I left Affymetrix while all this technology was being developed, and I'd been collaborating with his lab because with my PhD in biological sciences, I kept sort of looking at the biological implications of all the cool computational technology that was being developed. And it became apparent very quickly that there was a commercial opportunity here to expedite getting drugs to patients. And I thought this is something that we should advance forward. And realized that at the end of the day, I knew a lot about the technology, I was passionate about it, and it made sense for me to launch it, and decided to jump in. My prior training had actually primed me well to do that as well.
How difficult was it for you to raise money? Because you've closed one round of funding, which has helped you for the last 6 years, I guess, or 5 years. How easy or difficult was it for you to raise money?
So we raised our Series A during the recession, which was incredibly hard. But it is one where I think if you've got promising technology and you've got the ability to advance that forward in an interesting way and monetize it in an interesting way, you can raise funding. So despite it being hard, we did end up getting funding, and we're fortunate to have the funding that we did.
How many VCs did you meet?
Probably close to, I want to say 40.
So out of 40, how many said yes?
2 of them.
So that was a lot of work.
That was a lot of work. And I think, it's also one where, we pioneered this space. So this was a whole new way of thinking and doing, which was, it was an interesting sort of intersection of technology and biotech, which was not something, and I think even to this day, challenging for some investors who are much more steeped in one side or the other. So when you are at this intersection of 2 different worlds, 2 different business models, it can be a little challenging for people to sort of grasp that. But we're now seeing, more and more investors comfortable with data-driven, data sciences plays and funding coming in. There's companies that have gone on to raise $100 million at a very interesting valuation. So there's certainly appetite for this sort of a play now.
What are your thoughts on valuation?
It's a great question. And when you think about how you want to structure the valuation, obviously at the end of the day, it is dependent on what the market will give you, right?
No, you said you're a pioneer in the space. So
right.
I was wondering if companies have raised $100 million, their valuation is far higher.
Their valuation was over $1 billion. And so, it's always this tricky point of trying to ensure that you don't price yourself out of the next round. And ensuring that you do have investors that are going to support the company and help it reach its full maturation. So it is a tricky part to sort of map that out, but it's I think an interesting time to be in this space for sure.
So have you all discovered any drugs, or you're in the process of discovering?
We have. We've actually identified several drug candidates. One is for a gastroenterology condition called ulcerative colitis. This was a drug that already exists, and the idea is that this drug would be given for a gastroenterology condition. It's being used for something completely different. The idea is that it would be given at a lower dose and given in a way that keeps it just in the gastrointestinal tract. So it's restricting its delivery to the GI tract at a lower dose. So it's a completely new kind of drug. But it has the safety of the existing drug.
So even the delivery mechanism has changed.
The delivery mechanism will be different, and but the safety, because it's been used at much higher doses, it is a very safe drug, and so the safety issues are mitigated in that particular opportunity. And we're also developing drugs now for our own pipeline, where we're starting to develop our own drugs and take them all the way through the clinic ourselves, and those are focused in fibrosis. We've got a program in idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It's a lung condition. It's a really horrible condition. Patients cannot breathe. They have trouble taking a deep breath, and their lungs actually start to crumble. And this is one that has a very high mortality rate, in fact, higher than some of the cancers combined. So it's a really horrible disease. And one that we are applying our technology to come up with drug candidates for that particular condition as well.
Does it come because of heart condition?
No, it's actually, we don't know what causes it. We're still trying to unravel what causes it, and whether it's one disease or 10 diseases, we don't even know that about it, because it is a condition that, it manifests. It is challenging to diagnose accurately, although that's getting better, and it's one that impacts patients as they age. So this could be one that, starts earlier in life, and then, at a certain point just gets so bad that the patient cannot, they have trouble even walking, and they're out of breath even walking. And so that just starts to impact their quality of life. And when they get diagnosed, it's usually not that great in terms of, the stage at which it gets diagnosed.
So are these drugs available to patients, or?
We are in the process of discovering them. Our hope is to get them to patients as quickly as we can.
So how would the FDA process be different for your drugs compared to the other drug companies that typically take 10, 12, 15 years and spend billions of dollars?
That's right. So in our case, where we are working with existing drugs, and just to clarify, we are not focused solely on working with existing drugs. We do use that information to come up with completely new drugs as well. So depending on what the drug candidate we have, whether it's an existing drug or a new drug, there's different regulatory paths that the FDA looks at. In the case of an existing drug, you can mitigate some of the safety studies that have to be that have to be done because you already know this is a safe drug within a certain range. So you can go to the FDA and leverage that safety data and not have to redo safety studies again. So for instance, if we were to take a pill and make it into a cream, the FDA may look at it and say, okay, this drug has been used as a pill, so we know it's safe, but prove to me that your skin is not going to get irritated or a patient's skin is not going to get irritated.
So does that depend on the culture of certain patient community? Like in Japan, I understand they like to not sniff drugs but take it orally.
So there is a little bit of that adoption by the patient aspect that we have to look at. In the case of gastroenterology, suppositories are okay in certain parts of the world. They're not as acceptable in other parts of the world. There is that nuance in there, but the FDA doesn't look at that as a factor. They're more concerned about safety issues and then efficacy. So they want to make sure that you're not doing something to harm the patient when you're changing how you're delivering the drug, or if you are moving it in a new direction, that they want to make sure it is actually going to have efficacy.
How did you get interested in science?
That's a great question. I was good at it. And I enjoyed it.
Plain and simple? You were good at it?
Simple. I was good at it. I mean, if you look at the choices I had when I went through school, it was science or arts. And while I enjoy arts, it wasn't something I excelled at. I mean, it was something that I could have done as a hobby, but wasn't something I could see myself, pouring my heart and soul into. Science has always been something that's fascinated me, and
Even math?
I've enjoyed it. Absolutely, I loved math, and in fact, I did extremely well in math, and that helped with my grades when I was doing my master's degree. I did my master's in India, and so we didn't have choices in terms of which courses one could take and which ones we couldn't. Biomath and biostats were part of the core curriculum, and I did exceptionally well in biomath and biostats, which got my grade up, so I ended up topping the class, which is...
But you also got help from an aunt of yours in math,
though
you were good, right?
I did. I think that helped, where there were areas that I had some struggles with. I had help and was fortunate enough to be mentored by people who actually excelled in those areas.
Okay, so your aunt's help did give you that leg up.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then you came here, and in an unusual kind of a way, because it was not common for single girls from India to come here to do their graduate studies. How did that happen? What was the support that your parents gave you?
So I got accepted into the PhD program. I actually had a full ride scholarship in India, which I turned down because I knew I wanted to come here for my graduate training. I ended up getting accepted into Purdue, and my parents were very supportive of it because they realized that this was my passion. I wanted to pursue science, and I was going to do it no matter what. And so they were very supportive of me coming here and doing my PhD.
And it's been a very interesting journey for you.
It has. I think I've spent equal halves of my life now in both countries. Right? I spent half of my life in India, and the other half has been here. So it's sort of...
Did you ever think that you'd become an entrepreneur?
Yes, I think I had that
Really?
ambition. Yes, I think I had that ambition when I was little. I just didn't think it would happen as quickly as it did. I thought it would probably be a little bit later in life. But, when opportunities come along, you just have to reach out and grab them with both hands and run with them. So I enjoyed that aspect of it.
Tell us, what is the support your husband, Dr. Atul Butte, has given you?
So he and I are co-founders of this company, and we've collaborated personally, of course, for 17 plus years. But professionally, we've been collaborating for a while now. We've co-authored papers together. It's fun because I think we both live vicariously through each other. I mean, he's an academic and plans to continue to remain an academic. And I have gone off and done the entrepreneurial thing. And so we both get to sort of experience that. And he's been incredibly supportive. I mean, he's a passionate supporter of opportunities for women. And he's also extremely talented in terms of data sciences. So I have a built-in resource on the data sciences side that I can turn to at any point in time, which is very helpful when you're navigating this whole new field.
You actually have an in-house expert.
Absolutely.
What has been the greatest fear that you had to overcome?
I think fear of failure. I have never failed in my life, and so that was sort of what happens if this does not work out? That was, I think, one of the biggest things I had to overcome. And I had to realize that I have to give this 1,000% effort and make it happen and, do my best. And at the end of the day, I think the mission of the company, what we're trying to accomplish, and the team around us increases the odds that we should be successful.
Have you failed?
Not yet, and I hope we don't.
None of the experiments, nothing?
Experiments can fail, but I think when I look at failure in the context of the company not succeeding, that I think would be a larger, harder thing for me to take on. And it's one I think most entrepreneurs go through, but at the end of the day, I think we have to realize that this is about helping patients. And so when I keep that focus of, why am I doing this? Why do I get up in the morning and go to work? It is because, you have the opportunity to impact a patient's life. Even if it's a single patient's life, I think that will be incredibly satisfying and rewarding to be able to say, I've done something, I've done my part to help make the world a better place. And so that's what helped me overcome that fear and say, go out there and do it and give it your best shot. You
said you wake up in the morning because you want to do things. What keeps you awake at night?
I would say, the sort of looking at the macro trends of what's happening in this space and what shifts and changes might happen, how they might impact my business. Those are things that I worry about because I think those are things that are, I worry about them a little bit because those are outside your control. But at the end of the day, these are things that, you have to pay attention to.
Gini, we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for stopping by and talking to us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. If you missed any of our show, you can catch them on our YouTube channel. Join us next week for another new conversation. Until then, goodbye.
Support for the series on women in science and tech comes from Genentech, dedicated to breakthrough science and social good that supports local communities. Because making medicine is just one way to make a difference. Genentech. The future of science is here. Online at gene.com/future.